guys, so I hope you enjoyed the graphic score project. I really enjoyed recording them, and over the course of the project I had a lot of people ask me how I read these scores, and specifically had a lot of questions about one score that I'm going to go through, but just in general I want to go through interpreting graphic scores and how I do that and some things to make them a little bit easier to play for you guys. So the one I got asked about a lot is Sound Pictures in a Lonesome Mind by Maxwell Tfirn. And I understand it. It has heads and like gray blobs, and it is a little intimidating on paper. And I actually found this one to be one of the easiest to interpret in terms of there was a lot of direction given to me from the composer, and it just has to be interpreted through your voice. And that's obviously the difficult part. There's a lot of improvisation and things that a lot of players are uncomfortable with, rightfully so. But I think once you break it down a little bit better, it's not that intimidating. You just have to make choices. So this one was written for flute, and specifically flute and voice. So that definitely helped me, being someone who does a ton of flute and voice. So I took the heads to mean vocalization, and I took the multiple lines to mean sharing flute and voice. Whether or not that's what was intended, it's what I interpreted. And I think that's the biggest thing with graphic scores is like, it is your interpretation, and as long as you're following the composer's directives, it's a valid interpretation. If you're ignoring everything they told you and you're not really looking at what's on the page, then probably not a valid interpretation. But if you're trying to interpret what the composer wrote and you're following whatever limitations or restrictions they put on the piece, pretty valid in my opinion. Then you have note heads. Obviously they're indeterminate pitches. You have choice there to play whatever pitches you want, and also whatever techniques you want. They don't have to be traditionally played pitches, but you have low notes and high notes, and you have dynamic, and that makes sense. There's straight multiphonics with fingerings. Those are pretty easy. Obviously you can like aim for different pitches, and they're trilled and they're kind of warped, and there's a squiggly line that lets you do what you want. There's also a trill, so that squiggly line informs the rate of the trill, at least to me. Then there's clusters of no note head pitches, so can be whatever you want. It doesn't have to be a pitch. There's no note heads, so choose whatever pitch you want if you want it to be pitched. Can be air, it can be sound. And that's the big thing with this. It's about creating sound with flute and voice and with the body, so you don't have to play flute the whole time. Then there's another head, and there's a lot of very fuzzy, dark matter. So to me that implies interaction between the flute and the voice, making kind of fuzzy difference tones and like a sound blob that morphs. And then it kind of retreats back into the head and results in a multiphonic to me. The next section kind of blurs those lines even more, and that's in the program notes actually that Max wrote. There's multiple heads, so there's multiple sounds. And then it also grows. I always take triangles as growth. That's my own thing, but a lot of composers do think that way too. And then there's another like feathered beamed line, and then there's all these little like X's, and if you saw a lot of the graphic scores, you'll know that if there's X's or dots or things that look percussive, I use pits because I love it. So it's also a very personal choice there. Again, there's a little cluster of notes, and then there's these big like fuzzy rhombus shapes. So I'm taking those literally as like growth and decay. If they're growing quickly like a triangle, then they grow quickly. Then there's a rounded one that kind of grows and bulb. And then there's another beamed section. And then there's a fermata. So when you break it down like that, it doesn't even seem that complicated. Obviously, these are choices that I assigned to these symbols, but that's a totally valid way to go about doing this. It's actually a quite easy way to kind of start with a graphic score if you're uncomfortable or not comfortable with free improv, because then you have some little things that you can click into. In the final section, there's again some more beamed notes, there's a multiphonic, there's a squiggly line, there's all these things that we've seen before, and then there's another head. And at that point, it's clear that the music is kind of dying away, it's the end of the piece, and so you can take that as you will. The composer also gives an indication about how long it's supposed to be. There's a lot of direction here, and there's a lot of very approachable things within what looks like a very abstract piece. I think the same is also true for the piece I played by Micchelli. I didn't include the performance notes. Each color is assigned a different sound. So if you listen to that video, which I'll link in the cards, you can kind of figure out which colors meant what to me, at least. And then you take the shape and size and symbol within that color to interpret. And you move through the little units in a grid. You can't skip units, but you can go diagonally or left, right, up, down. And so you move through the symbol board like that. And when you look at it that way, it's no longer as complicated as oh my goodness, there are so many things on this page. How do I do this? What I think are actually more difficult scores to interpret, at least personally, and this is coming from someone with 15 years of very traditional music education, are the truly improvisational ones. Ones that are very drawing based, like Emily Wist's score, or Ben Damann's score, where there's no direction, it's just something on a page. Those ones I struggle with more. And I have to really force myself to think about what's on the page when there isn't anything that I recognize as a musical concept. With Ben's score, there's line weights and there's circles and there's dots and there's triangles and there's things that I can kind of create connections to musical ideas. But with Emily's score, with the rows, there aren't necessarily musical concepts on the page. You can create them. Line weight is always a great one. Line contour is a great way to easily find a nice way to start. With Emily's piece, I was thinking about creating a sound world that kind of fit the theme of the drawing and fit the coloring of the drawing more than playing what was directly on the page. I was using it more as inspiration for improvisation rather than a direct score, but I think that's also a valid way to interpret a graphic score. One of the wonderful things about graphic scores is that you have so much freedom, and some will have more directions than others, and that's totally cool, but you are given freedom to improvise. And I think for a lot of classical players, that's scary and that's intimidating, but it's also very freeing and something that you should definitely think about doing. I know I've become a million times better of a performer since I started improvising and writing and doing these kinds of projects. I'm less in a box, and while you might like your box, that's totally fair. I think musicians being adaptable and being multifaceted is really important. I think the biggest advice I can give for graphic scores is study them before you start. Think about sounds that you can create based on the symbols, things that you want to do. So that way when you get into it, you're not desperately searching for sounds that fit what's on the page. If you have some planning, it's like practicing and doing score study with a traditionally notated piece. It's just a little bit more abstract and you have to make a few more decisions yourself. But I think if you have that toolbox, which I always talk about, already set, then when you get into interpreting the piece, you have more ideas and you can go off on a tangent and come back and still be safe. And that safety is nice. I get that. But yeah, if you guys have any questions about other scores or other things to do with graphic scores, please let me know. I found this project really, really interesting and really fun, so I'd love to talk more about it. As always, if you like this video, give it a like. If you're new here, subscribe. If you want to support me more, check out my Patreon, and I will see you guys very soon. With Emily's piece, I was definitely more thinking about a sound world. rude.